Hey everybody, Alex here again. We are in week 13 thinking about the role of religion in globalization and of course how that relates to education worldwide in just so many different ways. Anyway, so we've got a lot of, quite frankly, ground to cover this week. This will be a regular week again. I know we've been doing some in-class group presentations and discussions about the different books. But this is us talking about the readings once again, so kind of excited about this. Let me just point out that you have two sources of readings for this week. One is from the Globalization Reader, and reading, of course, the section on globalization and religion. It's about 39 pages. And also reading chapters 10 and 12 from the Working World Careers in International Education, Exchange, and Development. Remember that the readings for this book, the Mueller and Overman book, are really you're just reading the front parts of each of those chapters and then using the rest of those chapters as reference material for yourself as you think about careers and moving forward. I also want to point out before we go too far a couple things. One is the questions that I'd like for you to think about as part of your application activities. The reason why I want to start with the questions is because the objectives are rather big, but the questions kind of focus it in on what you should be thinking about and what we will be talking about. So consider a couple of different things. One is you might start with considering where your career path is leading you. Think about the answers to these questions. These are the kinds of questions that the experts and the individuals that are highlighted, whose cases are discussed in your Working World book. These are the questions that they're asked. So think about how you would answer this. How do you define your cause? What drew you to that cause and to your field, whether that's comparative international education or education leadership or something else? How would you describe your field? And quite frankly, what is your role in that, or where do you fit within that field? At least what do you think the answer to that is? What's been your career path so far? Many of you have had experience as educators or working in development organizations or something else already. Some of you are coming directly from your undergraduate degree without any extensive practical experience, but what has been your academic career? Where has your brain been living for the past several years? Think about what you can see yourself doing on a day-to-day basis once you're working. What do you want to do? What are you comfortable doing? What do you feel your strengths are? What do other people tell you that your strengths are when you're in work situations or on team projects or things like that? How have you or do you network with others in your field or working on your cause or similar issues that you're interested in? And then, of course, do you have a mentor? Who is it? Why did you choose them? Why are you working with them? If you don't have a mentor, who might it be? Mentors can be really helpful in terms of not necessarily lining you up with the perfect job always, but guiding you in how you prepare for that career or the transition from your degree program into whatever your next adventure may be. So think about those. Think about those especially when you're reading the chapter from the Working World book. And then for globalization, I'd like for you to consider these three examples. And I have an unfinished sentence there, so I'll finish that real quick. Fixed it. So consider these questions related to globalization and religion and how that overlaps with education. First of all, let's think about the concept of deterritorialization. This is a concept that's introduced in one of your chapters from the Globalization Reader for this week. And it is discussed in terms of how religion deterritorializes all sorts of ideas, functions, etc. But does that same concept apply towards education? So one of the objectives for this week, and I'm going to run back up here, is to think about how formal mass education either embodies or mimics the characteristics and the mechanisms of religion. There have been critics of mass education who have said that it becomes a sort of secular religion and it disseminates worldwide, and that there is a belief in education worldwide that in many ways mimics a religious organization or religious belief. And so it's worthwhile to think about the ways that modern mass education or formal mass education, the kinds of schooling that most of us in this class or in the university level have participated in at some point. How that really reflects a lot of religious characteristics and mechanisms. You also want to think about how religion itself is a vehicle for globalization and a result of globalization. So both how does it cause it and how is it impacted by it. And I would recommend doing the same thing, not just for globalization, but also for contextualization. How is religion both a vehicle for contextualization and a result of contextualization? And then you start thinking about how there are similarities or differences between religion and mass education. So when we get to our questions here at the end, oops, a little further up, we can start asking questions about deterritorialization, not only in relation to religion, but also in relation to mass education and how that's implemented in national educational systems worldwide. So how is mass education like a secular religion, and how does it reflect or embody similar effects as religion, such as deterritorialization or successful globalizing, which I believe was the way that one of the authors from the globalization referred to evangelical Christianity. And then finally, I want you to consider, how does formal mass education constitute a thoroughly indigenized global phenomenon, the way that some religions have done the same thing. So again, how can you look at education as a secular version of religious institutions or organizations in terms of both globalization and contextualization? Those are the kinds of questions that I want you to consider as you're looking through the content for this week. And then there are several different modules. There are 3 different modules. First one is on education and religion as global social institutions, and you're going to be looking at some videos from the Khan Academy that simply, one, talk about what a social institution is and how important they are in terms of shaping not only what happens with individuals, but also the way that individuals are in many ways necessary for the reproduction and the maintenance of those social institutions. So that's going to be important. And then specifically thinking about how education, family, and religion are social institutions. Education and religion, of course, being 2 that we're particularly interested in this week. The idea being that they, as institutions, also share some functions or share some impacts on communities and societies and families themselves. The second module will be about education as a response to religious culture, and this is going to be a module that will go in a couple of different directions. One, we're going to look at an academic who studies cultural and religious differences in sexuality education, and we're going to use sex education as a way to consider some of the intersection between religion and education. Because often when we talk about sex education, religious institutions or religion as an institution and the culture that surrounds a community's religious norms and values will often then embed themselves in the education system or permeate the education system in a way that either restricts or liberates the kinds of sex education that can occur. Will also be, and I'm just going to zoom down to the bottom here, down to the next video here, to highlight a video that's going to look at the PEPFAR program. It's the president's program during the Bush years that looked at HIV and AIDS prevention and awareness. And the PEPFAR program was very much driven by a very fundamental, largely Christian perspective on sex and education around sex. And so this is a critical video of that vision, but it's an interesting examination of how education and religion sort of intersect, and it can be used as the tools to implement political positions as well. So politics and religion and how they overlap as well. It becomes a messy mix of religion and education and politics when you get to this point. And then we're going to look at a video that examines Islamic religious education in Germany in particular. Germany being a host country for many refugees in the recent past many of whom are Muslims. And so it's important to think about how religious education is operating. This will, in particular, this video highlights a university program that trains Islamic religious educators to then work in Germany's public schools. So you're going to get a perspective for how the state can and higher education can manage the intersection between religion and education, even in contexts where that religion might be slightly foreign to the indigenous population or the majority population. And then finally, I'd like for you to take a look at this video on making it as an international development and humanitarian aid professional. This isn't 100% alignment with chapters 10 and 12 from the Working World book, but it is going to give some insight from an international development professional on the kinds of things to consider and the ways to go about getting into a career in international education and development. So hopefully it's really helpful as you move forward. As always, I want you to, of course, prepare your questions, think about the objectives and how the videos and the readings from today are helping you respond to those, and also make sure that you post your comments right here at the bottom of the page in the Leave a Reply section. All right, can't wait to have this conversation with you, and I hope that you are having a fantastic week.